2009 Wharton India Economic Forum, titled India, The Road Ahead, took place in Philadelphia and brought together CEOs of leading Indian companies, investors, heads of non-profit organizations, sports celebrities, and Bollywood stars to discuss where India is headed in an age of economic uncertainty. Indian Knowledge at Wharton brings you one-on-one conversations with these leaders.
Okay, thank you, Rohan, for joining us.
Thank you.
I guess you produced Chandni Chowk to China, which is both a cross-cultural film in terms of for Indian audiences, and also the earliest foray of Bollywood, I guess, on the international stage. That released on January 2009. What has the reception been for that, and what does opportunities you see from Bollywood in that
I
experience?
think it was a very exciting project to work on. I think it was one of the widest released films. We released in more territories than any other film previous to that. Also released extensively in India. And I think the combination of India and China and the content side and the ability to come out with the assistance of a Hollywood studio to use their infrastructure to reach out to a wide audience has been very exciting, and it showed that there is a lot of scope to broaden the audience for Hindi film.
What has been the box office success of that?
It was, I would say, it's an average success. We were hoping for it to go a little further than that, but I think it still managed to take a very good opening, and it's got a good life on home video and all the other non-theatrical streams. So it's something that probably has not completely hit the mark, but it was a decent effort.
One of the things that struck me as I looked at the numbers for the costs of production of Bollywood movies as compared to Hollywood movies, as well as the box office returns on these. We are talking 1/10 of the scale for most Bollywood movies. How does this economics work in the context of someone like Warner Brothers, for instance, where obviously there's the box office side of it, but there's also a cost side of it?
Well, I think in the Indian cinema, it's very dynamic at this point. For most of its history, it's been an entrepreneurial and very independent producers have run it. In the last 5-7 years, this kind of corporate side has come into it, and so there was this huge influx of money that came in. So I think that supply of money probably distorted things in terms of increasing budgets, and I think it's going to settle down to a point where the risks and rewards will get aligned better, because ultimately every investor is looking for a return, like you were saying. So it has to be, I don't think our market yet is of the size to justify the bigger budget films that are being made at this point. So I think that's going to settle down a little bit, but there is still healthy growth. Theatrical revenues generally been increasing. Other forms, whether it's home video, satellite, overseas, are keeping pace, and in a lot of cases growing as well. So there's steady growth, but probably this was a bit of a distortion as a lot of players came in, a lot of money was chasing few projects. So the kind of means of production was kind of taken advantage of. But I think it'll settle down to a stage where we will have a more rational kind of split between what the costs are and what the returns can be.
Well, this is also a time, as you know, we are basking in the glow of Slumdog Millionaire's success. Now, that actually is not an Indian movie.
That's right.
So I guess it raises two questions. One, the fact that it was a non-Indian movie that was so successful in terms of at least its content being about India in the foreign market. So what lessons does that give to Bollywood in a sense of its opportunities, as well as the fact that it was a non-Bollywood player that actually was so successful?
Well, I think I really enjoyed the success of the film. I think one of the big things to learn, as I said earlier, such a dynamic market. Everyone is learning a lot. So recently, the trend has been to really pursue this kind of saturation release. So every film is bombarded on as many screens, that kind of a pattern. And Slumdog is a classic example of a film where they went out with four screens to begin with. They really built on word of mouth and created this momentum and that underdog story. Oh, have you seen this film? That was a fantastic strategy for the film, which is not the only film that's done it, but it really did it successfully. So we have to learn that. And I think as far as I think it's wonderful that it succeeded. There's an opportunity there, but it was very clearly made for a Western market. So I think any Indian filmmaker trying to replicate that kind of success needs to align themselves with a Western studio, or at least someone who has access to distribution and the infrastructure of the Western markets. Because without that, there's no chance of reaching out. We might have made 10 times a better film than Slumdog, but if you don't tie up with Fox Searchlight or whoever it is, there's no chance of reaching that audience. And then that's where the real game is. The numbers in America and the Western markets are just massive compared to us.
I guess there's obviously that market component of it. But the other aspect of, I guess, of Slumdog is also the aspiration of many Indian filmmakers to make it into the Oscars and be successful, I guess, in terms of being identified, on the award side. What do you feel about that component? We haven't been very successful in Oscars before.
No, I think it's, I really salute the guys who have succeeded. It's wonderful to get it, but I think for any creative person, it's a nice recognition, but that cannot be the reason for doing stuff. It's an award function from the United States rewarding essentially the makers and the creative people in their industry, and it's wonderful to be acknowledged by them. But and it makes a lot of sense if all your work is here, it's the ultimate pinnacle. But if you're working in Bombay, you're working for a Hindi-speaking audience, it's not entirely relevant. It's always, like I said, it's fantastic achievement, and I think they are on the top of the world in that sense. But it's not something that can drive you when you're making Hindi films.
Now you also have been involved in an indie production, I guess, and you also have been on the commercial side. What, I guess, prompted you to get into the indie side?
I think it's exciting. There's in urban India, there's many young audiences looking for alternatives to the very commercial kind of product that's put out there. So it was a great opportunity to do something. There were some very talented actors, a good script, and a chance to do something new. It was in the English language. It had also a kind of an international slant, as in it involved George Bush and some very topical kind of elements. So that all kind of added up to make it tempting. It was also based on a play that was very successful, so there was a kind of proof of concept that we were working with, and it felt good to do something that kind of pushed the boundaries, and from also, it's nice to be at the cutting edge and see how far you can push things.
Now, this is an English language film, and it is intended for the audience in India.
Well, it's intended for anyone that understands English.
Okay, but is that movie being marketed overseas as well?
We've actually appointed a sales agent, which is not the typical route that Indian films take, which is where you get the distributors for the NRI territories. In this case, we've appointed a sales agent, which are aiming to sell the various rights to different territories in a slightly more methodical manner. So they're going to be exhibiting the film at the Cannes Film Festival, a commercial screening for buyers, and hopefully use that as a platform to get our sales in different territories.
Now, the economics of the industry are changing in very significant ways. What impact does that have on the nature of filmmaking in India?
I think, filmmaking is essentially a costly commercial exercise, so we'll always feel right now what's happened, the first effect I've seen is that because of this recession, there's been a marked slowdown in advertising. The first thing that tends to go is advertising. So once advertising goes, it impacts the satellite rights for films. So that's been, till recently, 25, 30, 35% of a film's production cost was recoverable from the satellite rights. That's coming down drastically. So that's the first thing. So I think we'll feel it down the line. I think cinemas are kind of dropping their prices because I think consumers at this time are finding it maybe a 250 rupee ticket, family of 4, 6, maybe by the time you put all your entertainment in, it's a couple of thousand rupees, which is a lot at this time. So the challenges that we have to address, that which I think ultimately will make us work harder on the creative and make us more focused in making content that works.
Now, your father, Ramesh Sippy, was obviously a very famous Indian producer, and you have observed, I guess, not just from your experience and your time in the industry, but also from his. How has that changed from his times and what you are doing now?
Well, he's still working. We're working together, so he's very active with me, and it's wonderful to have his perspective because a lot of things change. These new entities have come in, but the inherent nature of the business has not fundamentally changed. Where it's ultimately dependent on good content. But I think it's in the time when he was making it, was pretty much theatrical sales was the only revenue, and there wasn't this whole aspect of marketing is the real big change that's come into the business, for better or worse. Earlier a film would run purely on word of mouth, the star cast it had, and the poster that you saw outside, that was the extent of the marketing. Now we've got hundreds of channels, we've got radio, we've got the internet. I mean, so many things, and that is all positive, but it also becomes a challenge as things get more fragmented to put yourself out there, and you are in a sense hard selling your product more and more, which is not necessarily the right thing for each film.
Now, I guess your father produced one of the most famous movies in India, Sholay.
He directed it.
He directed it. And Amitabh Bachchan was obviously very famous in it. And I find it curious, actually, that here you are, and Abhishek Bachchan has been working with you on a lot of these movies. I have two questions on that. How did that partnership between you and Abhishek come about? And also, I guess, since both of you have families with very famous parents, I assume they are both advantages and perils, I suppose, in that. Can you speak to that?
I think I went to Abhishek with the first script I had, and he was very positive about it and was very keen to work together, and it was very nice of him to be proactive, and we kind of brought it together on that. And so while he is a very dear friend, I think first of all, when we worked it together, I really have professional respect for him. I cannot afford to put any personal things. There's too much at stake each time. We all want success, and I will do whatever it takes to ensure that. So it has to be professional when we're working, and it's great to work with a dear friend. As far as I see primarily the advantages because you get access and opportunities. Ultimately, you have to prove yourself because audiences that are paying hard-earned money for their tickets are not concerned with who your family is. Maybe they'll give you one chance, a couple of chances, but after that, you really have to prove yourself. So I think within the industry, you get opportunities. You have the great advantage of having met people and a network of people you can who are accessible to you. But ultimately, they also want to work with someone who they perceive as doing a good job and ensuring success in their careers. So I think the perils are more in the mind. I think that is up to you to make, and I think those things are kind of a mindset. If you want to see it in a pressure kind of way, it will always be that. But if you look at it as a positive, and which is the way I do, and I've only seen that. I mean, there's so much goodwill I've received as a result of my relationship to my father, and I'm sure the same is true for Abhishek too. That you try and make that work towards helping you do what you want, and I think so far it's only been that.
Now, you have worked with Warner Brothers, and I guess amongst the early studios, I guess, who have come out with a movie with a foreign studio. How do you see this role of foreign companies in Bollywood evolving over the next few years?
Well, I think they had a very good group of people, and they're obviously one of the biggest studios in the world. So it was a very educational experience for me also to learn the studio system and how it works. But I think also lines are getting blurred more and more because if you look at the studios in India, whether it's the Studio 18 has also got a Viacom component to it, if I understand, and other companies are raising money in the United Kingdom, things like that. So it's kind of, the lines are getting blurred of what is Indian, what is foreign. Ultimately, I think it's very much a people-driven business. So it's about the 5-10 people who are in the critical positions in each company that will determine it. And even in the case of Warner Brothers, it was essentially an Indian team that was running the show on a day-to-day basis. So it's really about getting a good set of people in and leveraging their relationship with the studio to maximize the success you can achieve.
Can you tell us how that partnership came about with Warner Brothers?
Well, I met up with the gentleman called Richard Fox, who heads the international production, was in India in 2006, and I had the opportunity to meet him, and we just struck a good rapport, started talking, and then when we had a script that seemed right for me, the idea of this Indian and kind of Chinese kung fu element seemed like an interesting project to take to a partner like Warner Brothers, and they responded very well to the concept and the script, and it grew very organically from that over a period of time.
Now, Bollywood has always had a very strong sales component, I guess, in overseas markets. To some degree, it is with NRIs. To some degree, it is parts of the world which have an interest in Indian movies. First, can you tell us how important in the economics of the industry is this overseas market, and how do you see that as influencing, I guess, even projects that are now taking place in India?
I think as a ballpark, I would say somewhere between 10 and 20% of a film's budget would be what is from the overseas markets. For some films, they play stronger, and some films play stronger in India. So, but I think it has a very important cultural role because it's a very strong component of the image of India as projected through our movies, especially in international areas. So that part of it is also very significant. So I think it'll go hand in hand. Recently, we've had films that are very rooted in India that have been successful, whether it's a Gajani in the last year. Before that, the Munna Bhai series are very Indian films that have also worked very well both in India and outside India. So I think it's always going to be a balance, and I think that's what's nice about the upcoming kind of market we're in, is that there's room for a lot of different kind of products, including stuff that is very India focused and that also has an outward look to it.
Now, within the India context, as I guess these companies like Warner Brothers come into India to support Indian movies, one also imagines they're going to be coming into India with their movies. Do you see challenges for the Indian industry as it opens up to foreign movies?
I think so far it's been resistant. I guess the language has been a restriction for foreign movies, and dubbed films have not yet taken off. But I think they are... younger urban India definitely is speaking more English and is more comfortable with watching English films. So it's definitely a bigger challenge coming up in the next generation or so, that we have to compete with good products that are being made from all over the world. So I think we have to definitely keep our production quality high, our kind of story sense and all of that has to be kept higher because of the fact that these films, and a lot of these films also do well on television when they're dubbed in, especially they have the budgets to make special effects driven films, monsters and creatures and stuff like that. Those kind of films rate well on television as well, and obviously take away some revenue from otherwise what would be local content.
Finally, I guess if you can speak to the kind of movies, projects that you are currently working on, and what role you see, I guess, of globalization in the movie sector in, let's say, the next 4 or 5 years.
Well, I think both technology and globalization are going to play a huge part. The way the digital revolution is underway, it's already, there's great equipment and possibilities to lower production costs, and to that extent lower barriers to entry to make interesting films. And as we are getting more connected, I think there are chances to put together stories at a lower cost, which take on different parts of the world. So I think there is a chance to really do new kinds of stories, but it's always about getting the right people together. Like a Slumdog was a very interesting example of an IFS officer wrote a book. It was picked up by a British studio. Then a Scottish director came on board, and that's a fantastic way. So I guess that's really the dream, is if you can bring in a team like that from regardless of from where they are, but come together on a project, that would be a fantastic kind of way to put a film together, and I hope that in India we can also originate these kind of things. This time we had some technicians who were part of it. Next time it would be great if the origination could come from an Indian source. Even though the creative origin was written by an Indian, it'd be nice if the producer was also an Indian on a film that succeeds like this.
Well, I guess you'll be one of those producers. So
I hope so.
What are you working on?
Well, there's a couple of scripts that I'm hoping to direct in a couple of, in a genre of a thriller. So there's that something like that which I've been talking to Abhishek about, which I hope to roll in the later part of the year. And as a producer, looking at some very interesting films made on a limited budget, but with very high concepts and interesting ideas. So the challenge, is there's a huge appetite for movies, huge demand from the number of screens that we have, and the fact that they need new content all the time. So I think there's an opportunity to do things. So just trying to get the right combination of the reasonable budget, good talent attached to it, along with at the heart of it, it should be an exciting concept, and trying to get those. But it's always a little bit of counting frogs. If you get 3 or 4 things in, one goes out, you have to be patient enough to start again and not just go ahead because you've, the engine has started rolling. So you have to be able to bring it back and get it into perfect alignment before you move ahead.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.